Alexander the Great was born in Macedonia over 2,300 years ago. He studied under the great philosopher Aristotle, who gave him a great appreciation of Greek culture. Alexander became convinced that his father was the Greek god Zeus rather than King Philip II of Macedonia. When Alexander was 19 years old, his father was murdered. Alexander became king in 336 BC. Finishing the job his father started, Alexander united the Greeks, combining an army of Macedonian and Greek warriors. He soon turned his attention to the giant Persian Empire. It took Alexander only 3 years to defeat the powerful Persian Empire. By the time he was 25, and in only 6 years, Alexander had become the king of Macedonia, the leader of the Greeks, pharaoh of Egypt, and the great king of Persia, known today as Iran. Everywhere he went, Alexander spread Greek culture. Alexander was a ruthless and determined leader. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. Many of Alexander's soldiers had not seen their families for years and wanted to return home. In 323 BC, while in Babylon, Alexander got very sick and died. He was only 32 years old. Historians believe he may have been killed by his own men. After his death, his empire fell apart. Part of the reason was that Macedonian and Greek warriors did not get along. Many areas that Alexander conquered regained their independence. Fun facts: Alexander founded many cities, often naming them after himself, such as Alexandria in Egypt. Alexander respected local customs, wore Persian clothes, and married Persian women. He also encouraged his soldiers to marry Persian women so that they would share both Persian and Greek cultures. Alexander named a city after his horse. Charlemagne was one of the great leaders of the Middle Ages. He was king of the Franks and emperor of the Roman Empire. He lived from April 2nd, 742 until January 28, 814. Charlemagne conquered much of the Saxon territories, expanding into what is today Germany. At the request of the Pope, he also conquered the Lombards in northern Italy and took control of the land. From there, he conquered Bavaria, or Germany. He also took on campaigns in Spain to fight the Moors, where a part of Spain became part of the Frankish Empire. As he took over territories, Charlemagne would allow local rulers to remain in charge. He also left local cultures and laws in place. Charlemagne had an impact on many areas, including church music and civil works such as the Fossa Carolina, a canal built to connect the Rhine and Danube rivers. By the way, please like and subscribe to this channel for more educational videos. Fun facts: Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire on Christmas Day. Charlemagne could not read or write, but he believed strongly in education and made sure his people could read and write. As the founding father of both the French and the German monarchies, he is nicknamed the Father of Europe. Knut the Great was the king of Denmark, Norway, and England. Although he is considered one of the most important English kings, he was Danish himself. Knut was born in 995 AD in Denmark to a family of kings. At the time of his birth, his father, Svein Forkbeard, was the king of Norway and Denmark. Knut was taught military arts from an early age. His mentor was the famous chieftain and Viking Thorkel the Tall. His military training occurred on the island of Wallen off the coast of Pomerania. Knut made a name for himself during his father's invasion of England in 1013. The invasion was successful, and Svein Forkbeard became the king of England. However, Svein died the same year, and Knut's brother Harold became king of Denmark. The English nobility asked Ethelred, the former English ruler who was defeated by Svein, to return and become king again. Ethelred quickly gathered forces and defeated Knut's disjointed army. Knut returned to Denmark and gathered his forces to try again. In 1015, Knut launched his invasion of England, and by October 1016 his invasion was successful. He captured London and made a treaty with Edmund, King of England. Knut became king of all English territory north of the Thames River. Edmund's holdings were to be transferred to Knut after Edmund's death. However, Edmund died within weeks of the treaty. With Edmund's death, Knut became the sole ruler of all of England. He strengthened his control over England by executing some English nobles and by implementing administrative reforms. In 1018, his brother Harold, king of Denmark, died. Knut went to Denmark to claim the Danish throne. After strengthening his rule in Denmark, Canute returned to England in 1020. He established good relations with the church and supported the clergy. In 1027, Canute invaded Scotland with a huge army and gained the allegiance of 3 Scottish kings. In 1028, Canute sailed with 50 vessels to invade Norway. The king of Norway, Olaf Haraldsson, could do nothing to stop the mighty army of Canute. With this victory, Canute was crowned king of Norway. Canute is remembered as an influential king. He brought together English and Danish kingdoms, and this benefited both. After his death in 1035 AD, his son Harthacnut succeeded him. Unfortunately, Harthacnut and his sister Kunigunde died within a decade of Knut's own death. After the death of Harthacnut, his half-brother Edward the Confessor restored the rule of the House of Wessex in England. This resulted in the end of Canut's family rule. Genghis Khan was born in 1162 and grew up on the cold plains of Mongolia. His given name was Temujin, which meant finest steel. His father, Yesugei, was the Khan, or chief, of their tribe. When Temujin was only 9 years old, he was sent to live with the tribe of his future wife, Borte. However, after a few years, Temujin discovered that his father had been poisoned by some enemy Tartars. He returned to his home tribe to become the Khan. Upon returning home, Temujin discovered that his family had been betrayed. Another warrior took up the role as Khan and kicked Temujin and his family from the tribe. Temujin helped his family survive the first winter alone and then began to plot his revenge. Over the next several years, Temujin began to build up his own tribe. He married Borte and formed an alliance with her tribe, and his army continued to grow. When Temujin finally fought the Tartars, he showed no mercy. He destroyed their army and killed their leaders. He then began to conquer enemy Mongol tribes. After conquering his greatest enemies, the other Mongol tribes agreed to follow Temujin. They named him Genghis Khan, or ruler of all. After uniting the Mongol tribes, Genghis turned to the rich lands of the south. He first attacked the Shishia people in 1207. After 2 years, they surrendered. Genghis wanted to establish trade with the Muslim lands to the west, so he sent a trade delegation there to meet with their leaders. However, the men of the delegation were killed. Genghis was furious and spent the next several years destroying the cities to the west with over 200,000 warriors helping him. Genghis got as far as Eastern Europe, destroying everything along the way. Genghis Khan arrived in China and died in 1227. No one is quite sure how he died. Fun facts. Despite being one of the most powerful and wealthy rulers in the world, he preferred to live in a tent called a yurt. He prayed at the sacred Burhan mountain for guidance. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769 in the city of Ajaccio on the island of Corsica. Coming from a fairly wealthy family, Napoleon received a good education. He went to a military academy in France and trained to become an officer in the army. When his father died in 1785, Napoleon returned to Corsica to help manage the family's affairs. While Napoleon was in Corsica, the French Revolution occurred in Paris, France. The people rebelled against the King of France and took control of the country. The royal family and many aristocrats were killed. Upon Napoleon's return, he allied himself with a group of the revolutionaries called the Jacobins. He was appointed artillery commander at the siege of Toulon in 1793. The city of Toulon was occupied by British troops and the British Navy had control over the port. Napoleon came up with a strategy that helped to defeat the British and force them out of the port. His military leadership in the battle was recognized by the leaders of France, and at the young age of 24, he was promoted to the position of brigadier general. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French army in Italy. When he arrived in Italy, he found the army poorly organized and losing to the Austrians. However, he used clever tactics and positioning in order to move troops quickly and efficiently around the battlefield. He soon drove the Austrians out of Italy and became a national hero. Napoleon had led a military expedition in Egypt and returned to Paris in 1799. The government in France, called the Directory, was losing power. Napoleon and his allies, including his brother Lucien, formed a new government called the Consulate. Originally, there were supposed to be 3 leaders, but Napoleon made himself the first consul and dictator of France. Napoleon established the Napoleonic Code. This code stated that jobs in the government would be based on skills, not birth or religion. Before that, the king gave top jobs to aristocrats as favors, often resulting in unqualified people in key roles. Napoleon also helped to improve the French economy by building new roads and encouraging commerce. Napoleon also set up non-religious schools so anyone could get an education. In 1812, Napoleon decided to invade Russia, but many of his soldiers starved to death along the way. After a tough battle with the Russian army, Napoleon entered Moscow but found the city empty. As winter approached, Napoleon's army ran out of supplies. He had to return to France, but by the time he got there, most of his army was gone. With much of Napoleon's army lost in the invasion, the rest of Europe now turned against France. Napoleon didn't have a big enough army and was soon forced into exile on the island of Elba in 1814. Napoleon escaped from Elba in 1815. The army quickly backed him and he controlled Paris for a period called the 100 Days. The rest of Europe did not want Napoleon to return. They gathered their armies and defeated him at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. Napoleon was once again forced into exile. Napoleon died, probably from stomach cancer, after 6 years of exile on Mount St. Helena on May 5, 1821. Fun facts. The famous composer Beethoven was going to dedicate his 3rd Symphony to Napoleon but changed his mind after Napoleon crowned himself emperor. Napoleon was fairly short, at about 5 feet 6 inches. However, he would have been of average height for the time period that he lived. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.